Welcome to the first episode of the Everything Education podcast, where we discuss all things international education. My name is András, and in the past 2 decades, I've been wearing a fair few hats. I'm an educator, I run an education travel agency, and I also work as consultant for schools. In this podcast, every month, we'll have an in-depth conversation with expert guests about issues that really matter in the international education landscape. And I'll also bring you portraits of some of the most exciting people in the industry. In this first episode, we'll be talking about native and non-native English language teachers. We'll start with a conversation with an expert guest, and then I'll talk to 3 educators and 3 agents, so you're in for a long treat today. Let's get started. Hi, Anna.
Hello.
Nice to see you again.
Likewise.
For those who don't know you, do you mind introducing yourself briefly? Just tell our listeners about your long-standing relationship with the ELT sector.
Sure. I've been a teacher and a teacher trainer for over 20 years, teaming up with various organizations, people, schools whose mission is similar to mine. So how can we make the processes of teaching and learning both more enjoyable and more effective?
Our paths have crossed a fair few times in our very short lives already. We went to school together, and then a little bit later, you were one of my Delta trainers at IH Budapest.
Happy days.
So I thought I ask you to come to this podcast as an expert guest, because the first topic we're looking at is the question of native and non-native teachers. And we had a conversation in which I told you about the reason for doing this podcast. So you know the story, but the listeners might not. So I'll just quickly share the story again. Please act as if you were surprised.
Okay.
So a few weeks ago, in one of the big education workshops, Study Travel Alfie London, I was talking to one of the language schools, an established language school. And when I asked them about their USPs, and I asked them to tell me a little bit about what teaching is like in their school, the first and pretty much only thing they told me was that all of the teachers are native. And I was shocked, not because I haven't heard anything like that before, not because I wasn't told this before about me not being a non-native teacher and therefore not being qualified for a job before, but because I was surprised that some people are still so openly setting this as a selling point, as a measure of teaching quality in a UK setting. So let's talk about that. And the first thing I'm going to ask you today is whether you've got any sort of defining memories about native, non-native teachers. Have you ever been in a situation which made you feel uncomfortable? In other words, what's your bias? Because I've got a very clear bias and a very clear opinion coming into this discussion. So how are you coming into this?
When we first started talking about this, I think one of the first stories that came to mind was during my CELTA, where it was one of the sessions we were talking about grammar, and there was an Australian on our course whose English was really good. I mean, I actually sometimes had
Despite coming from Australia.
sometimes I had a hard time understanding them, but I mean, I still am working on my English, every single day, and I'm really proud of it, / insecure about it, all the usual things with non-native speakers trying to be as proficient as they can possibly be and being good role models for the students while doing so. And so so this person said, okay, so 3 forms of the verb. Okay, so like go, going, and what's the third one? And I remember just sitting there going like, what? Wait, what? And I think that is a really great example of like, some things that you do have as a native speaker and some things that you might not have, or might work for something that is more evident to me, because grammar education was part of how I learned English. So 3 forms of the verb, which is something kind of basic when it comes to teaching English, is not is easily available to me.
Yeah, I think it's a really good example when we talk about awareness of grammar and language and the ability to use meta language and just generally being able to talk about grammar, really. What is it that native speakers and native English language teachers do bring to the table that a non-native teacher like us could never?
I mean, loads of things, like I remember in the old days before sort of AI came around, like what's the most natural way of saying this? What exactly is the difference between this and that? And I'd always like, oh yeah, let me just wait a couple of weeks until I see my friend Neil and I can ask him about this. So these nuances of language that before AI, if you wanted to look these up somewhere, you wouldn't even know where to start and how many places to cross-reference. And so all the knowledge they have about how language is actually used and, little differences, subtle differences between things, how like pragmatics, like, what things actually do to you when you hear them or, say them. And pronunciation, obviously.
Why do you say it's obvious about pronunciation?
I think maybe just for me, like the amount of insecurity that I need to deal with. Well, need to. It's. I mean, I bring this on myself, and I think it's actually this improved a lot. But I used to be so, insecure about my pronunciation. Like, what if I say that wrong? I think that's changed a lot over the years because I don't think we have a lot of people who, or my perception is that the amount of people who are after a certain model of pronunciation is, what was the beginning of my sentence? Like there are fewer and fewer people for whom that is important. Like I remember I used to date a Hungarian guy, and whenever I took him to the language school, party or something, and people would ask him, "So what are you doing in Hungary?" Because he didn't sound like he was from Hungary. Like he was so proud. This was 20 years ago. And I think it was a big thing 20 years ago. I don't think it's so important these days. I don't think it's, that it's that fashionable because we look at English as the lingua franca as it is. And, everyone speaks it their own way, and that's totally fine. So I think what I meant is the confidence slash insecurity slash, I have no idea. I'll need to look it up.
Yeah, and so you're saying that's what the native speaker aspect brings in within a teacher because they know these answers inherently.
Yeah, so just like it's really easy for me to do this on the grammar front, for the pronunciation, it would be a lot easier, more accessible to them. That's my experience.
Okay. What is it that a native teacher can't do? Is there anything?
I mean, I don't, I want to stay away from generalizations, but in my experience as director of studies and teacher trainer, working with lots of native speaker teachers, one, apart from the grammar thing that we talked about, one area that I saw a lot of people struggle with is grading your language so that you're easily understandable. So very often the perception of just being like slower might help people understand you more. And so the awareness is lacking about, what is A1 vocabulary, what is A2 vocabulary, like what you can do to your sentence structure and a number of other things to make yourself easily understandable by students. That is something that, in my experience, has been difficult for native speaker teachers.
Yeah, of course, we can generalize and we see tendencies and different people come in different ways into their journey into teaching. Some will be native speakers and already have a great awareness of language, and that's how they get into teaching. Some of them will pick it up during teacher training, and it's all fine. What's an ideal teacher like? What's a good teacher like? If we set aside the native, non-native dimension, or we don't have to.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to be a little bit annoying here, and I'll say the first thing I would say is that a good teacher is someone who is authentic. And for this reason, I don't think I could tell you this is what a good teacher needs to be like. You know what I mean? Like one thing that
Sorry,
can work for one.
sorry to stop you there. So, what does authentic mean?
So authentic, like to themselves, So as a teacher trainer who is focused on like, methodology, do this, try that. I really don't think there is one right way of doing things. I mean, there are principles that I believe in, that it's what I said about language learning being and teaching, so being enjoyable and effective. So, a focus on real use. So that means a number of things. So paying attention, how language is changing all the time, paying attention that there are different ways of doing things, doing things in a meaningful way. So not just doing them to tick a box, but because, we're communicating, acknowledging the people in the room, including yourself. But what I meant by authentic is that I think a good teacher is a good teacher when they do things that work well for them, And there are a number of things, if you came to watch my class, there are a number of things that I do that maybe wouldn't work for you, and vice versa. The one thing I wanted to say is that, in my experience, a good teacher is someone who does not stop learning. And this doesn't have to be about the language, although, because the language does change all the time, you are kind of forced to learn, even if, you're proficient or a native speaker or whatever, because there's going to be new expressions appearing. There's, grammar rules are going to start, the whole thing about spoken grammar. So grammar rules are going to change and evolve. But someone who is ready to learn, whether it's methods, whether it's what's happening with the language, whether it's how do I deal with the next generation, in my experience, has a greater chance of being a good teacher for the majority of their students.
I think what you say about learning and keep learning as a good teacher, that's quite interesting. I mean, if you have a long career as a teacher, the world is naturally changing around you, and you can either keep up with the pace or not. And regardless of whether you're a native speaker or not, there will be new expressions that you have to learn. There's going to be new things about the world that you have to learn. And if you don't, then you can't keep up with the students. And your authenticity will probably not be good enough for your learners. Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. And the other thing as well that I do think is universally important is that you do need to find a way to explain, show, make relevant, help your students notice complicated things in a simple way. I mean, it might not be grammar, because we know, the value of explicit grammar instruction is debatable, but it's going to be patterns, there's going to be things, there's going to be some sort of norms that, your students will need your help with. And knowing and understanding these in their complexities is important. But for me, something a good teacher can do is like try and find a way of getting this across that is simple enough to be understood.
And that doesn't have to do anything with being a native speaker or not. Is that right?
No, I mean, in a way, you could argue that if you're not a native speaker, then that part might be easier, because
Mm.
maybe that's how your understanding, built up or emerged. I'm not saying it's impossible, this kind of awareness to obtain if you are a native speaker. It's just it's a different path, but it's definitely not something that you automatically would have if you're a native speaker.
At what stage of learning a language do you think it's really valuable, if there's any stage like that, for a language learner to be exposed to native speakers, whether they're teachers or not?
I mean, this is personal, but I don't think there is such a stage. I mean, I guess the thing that would be interesting for me is, like more and more you can be exposed to people whose English, or, the language you're learning is different to where you are, or there are nuances there that you haven't come across before. But it could be anybody's idiolect, right? It doesn't, because when you say native, like native speakers can be so different, right? Like you mentioned, I don't know if you mentioned him, but we should, Neil, my co-trainer on the Delta, is incredibly sophisticated, but not all native speakers are like that. So I think, as as your language knowledge progresses, it's great if you can expose yourself to more and more Englishes and different speakers. I don't personally think, especially with English, right? Like, I mean, there are native speakers, of course, but there are so many people for whom it's a second language. So my advice would be expose yourself to as many speakers as you want to. And if being exposed to a native speaker is important for you for some reason, then yeah, go that way. But I don't think this is like a box you have to tick, when you get to C1 or C2 or whatever.
What's your view on learning English abroad? I've been working in a UK ELT context for some time. Most of the people who are listening to this podcast will be working in the industry of teaching English or other languages in the context of a country in which the language is spoken. Is there value in it for a student to go abroad for short or medium term to learn language in its context, you think?
Definitely. I mean, it's not actually something I have a lot of experience with, except for going to Greece for a summer and picking up a little bit of Greek as an adult. Um, I mean, I guess the reason I'm hesitating is, this day and age, especially English, it's possible for you, if you're motivated enough, to sort of surround yourself by English in a way, even if you're not in an English speaking country, but obviously not the same way, right? So all the interactions you will have, everything that happens outside of class is a completely different world. Um, so yeah, I think again my answer is, if that's something that you think you feel is valuable to you and you will take advantage of it, because then, on the other hand, like there are so many people, we knew so many people at the language school, that came to Hungary, lived in Hungary, were exposed to the wonderful language of Hungarian, and then nothing happened. Do you know what I mean? So just going there and hoping that immersion is going to take care of the language learning process might not do the trick, but there definitely is value as long as one puts in the work or has the right attitude to it. Am I making sense?
Yeah, you are, and it's interesting how you focus the immersion aspect for outside the classroom. So what you're saying is that immersion and the added benefits of being in another country will actually happen or not happen outside the classroom. Is that right?
Well, I might be missing something really obvious, but I was just thinking about my classes, like the ones I used to teach at IH across the road. So you would have students arriving in class, switching to English because we had some international students, but mostly Hungarian, and then they would leave the class, and then most of them would switch back to Hungarian. So I imagine what happens within the class would not be that different, but maybe I'm missing something very obvious.
Maybe you're not. I think the expectation from quite a few people is that if I go to a language school in the UK, I'll learn English from British teachers. Therefore, it's going to be more valuable than going into a language school across the road and learning from Hungarian, German, Polish, Greek, Spanish teachers. And that's why some language schools feel that they have to actually employ and advertise native teachers because that's what people want to buy from them.
I see that differently. I mean, to me, that comes down to I mean, we had this thing, we had it at IH, we had it at the British Councils, we had it, in, different schools that there's a perception of the, native speaker. But I don't know, that was like 10, 15 years ago. I was kind of hoping we were over this.
Oh,
And
me
it
too.
was,
So thinking back to the time that you spent with language schools, did you ever get requests from students or parents to have native teachers?
yeah, sure.
Did you get into their motivation? Did you have to deal with complaints or requests like that?
I mean, requests definitely. And then it was, I mean, depending on the customer, but it was often a case of like, with so many things in life, like what is the underlying need that you're trying to meet? Because asking for a native speaker teacher, I think, is like a surface strategy that someone is choosing because they want to meet an underlying need. And maybe if we can discover what the underlying need is, then there is another way, a better way to address it. So it was like, I need a native speaker because I want a teacher who doesn't make mistakes. Oh, wonderful. Then you can choose any of our teachers because they don't make more mistakes than, what a native speaker does. Earlier, when you were speaking in Hungarian, you made this mistake, and you're a proficient speaker of the language. So, you know, or I want a native speaker. I mean, I want a native speaker because I want this model of pronunciation. Okay, then we have these four teachers in the staff room who have that model of pronunciation, two of them native speakers, two of them not. You could have Anders if you wanted to, and that's an option. um and sometimes it turned out that, because I want to learn the language really well, I really want to understand why I say something like that. And then you might say, well, in that case, the person you really need is this guy from Bulgaria, because he's really good at that.
So it's about understanding the underlying need and probably a little bit of education.
Yeah, but like coming from the right place, like not. I think it's important that the first reaction is not like, you don't need a native speaker. Here's what you need. But the curiosity, like, why is this so important to you? and then thinking about how that need can best be met. And also, with some students, you have this like we used to have this super important, individual students, paying lots of money. And then it could be like, like oh, we had the thing of like two teachers co-teaching a course. That was always often valuable. I remember when I was first put on a proficiency course, I was so scared, but it was a wonderful opportunity. It was a native speaker and me. We shared the course, and it worked really, really well. So sharing a course is one thing, and also like not a trial period, but saying, okay, why don't you start with this teacher if this is what you want? But then really get to the bottom of what do they mean by native speaker. And then we'll check back in after a few lessons or a certain amount of time and see how it's going and are all the needs met that you want to be met.
So it's having a conversation about the real need and addressing the real need rather than throwing a native speaker solution at a problem which quite possibly doesn't need that.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you very much, Anna. It was a pleasure to see you again. We're now going to move on to speaking to 3 schools who will also share their thoughts about working with native and non-native English language teachers. But first, let's hear from our sponsors. Well, guess what? There's no sponsor to this episode, which means 2 things. 1, you can enjoy some nice forest ambience while you're waiting for the next part to begin. But also, 2, you are the sponsor of this episode. But don't worry, it's not going to hurt. All you have to do is to give us a follow or subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on. But please do it, and do it now. Thank you. And we're back with our school panel. I've got 3 wonderful guests, and we'll talk about how they approach the question of native and non-native teachers. Thank you for being here. Really appreciate it. Before we get started, for anyone who doesn't know you, would you mind introducing yourself briefly and telling us about your journey with an ELT? Shoko, do you want to start?
Thank you, Andres. So, hi everyone. My name is Shoko. I'm the CEO of Celtic English Academy. I was one of the first students studied English at Celtic over 20 years ago. And then I joined the school as one of a junior member of staff and built up. And then I'm now CEO. I wear also another hat, which is a chair of English UK.
Any defining memories for you about the question of native and non-native teachers?
I haven't been asked by any agent recently, at least in the last few years, requesting specifically about a native English teacher. But as I'm non-native, I'm always thinking about native and non-native sort of the discussions. I always feel that I can't express as well as I could perhaps in my own native language. When I was elected as the chair of English UK, I felt that it was like a bit of a conventional thing, that our whole sector is sort of willing to accept and support somebody like myself to become a chair. So although, yes, there are some conversations and some people, I agree that there are some people still talk about native English speaker as a better teacher, which I don't approve. But I think as a whole sector, in a general consensus, generally people think that having non-native speaker or native speaker they are basically irrelevant subject. That's how I strongly feel. Just my being elected as a chair of the National Association.
And I think that you being elected as chair is quite symbolic as well, because you are very humble about yourself, Shoko. English not being your first language doesn't seem to stop you from being able to express yourself, or obviously to have the highest office in English language teaching in the UK. So I think I'm not the only one who's very glad to see you there. But also, have you ever felt that you couldn't do the job just because you didn't grow up speaking English?
The main frustration is I can't express freely myself. My highest IELTS score was 6.5, but that's something I took nearly 20 years ago.
Yeah, maybe.
So
I imagine that if you took it today, would it be slightly higher than that?
I'd like to think so, but I don't know. I don't have time to study. But yeah, so that's the main thing that I feel. But in terms of the quality that I can offer, the determination and the hard work that I do, I think I can fulfill the role. That's how I feel. Otherwise, I wouldn't have stood. I think it's more about how I feel about myself rather than my capability. And I think that is exactly the same thing applied to teachers or support staff or anybody who work in our sector, including homestay providers. I host sometimes students in my house, and my children absolutely love. Our main language at home is English. And by staying with the host family is basically to have British way of life. Although I'm Japanese, I still have a Japanese passport, but then I have lived in UK for longer than being in Japan. So in some ways, I adapted in a British way of life, and that's what we offer as a whole experience.
Thank you, Shoko. Let's move on to Marike.
Thank you, Andras. I am originally from South Africa. You can probably hear that from my accent. I live in Germany now, and I head up the recruitment and training divisions for Oskar English. It's a company based in Berlin that offers English language immersion camps to German kids all over Germany. And a different department in the company also offers English lessons, obviously at a very basic and a very fun level, but to children between the ages of about 2 and 8. And my very first encounter with any kind of question around native English speakers, native English speaking teachers was in my current company a couple of years ago, when the head of a specific department said to me, and of course the teachers that we recruit have to be native English speakers. And I was so shocked that I think I laughed a little bit. And I said, what on earth do you mean by that? And she started stammering. And that's when I had to go and sit and not only have a meeting with my colleagues so that we could really kind of thrash through my experience or my shock at the question, but also how we were going to respond to that as a department and then ultimately as a school.
You talk about shock and being shocked, and that was my reaction as well during the recent conversation. Who do you find is typically shocked by a situation like this? Because there are quite a few people who feel very strongly about the whole question. And when somebody says the exact opposite of what we believe in, as in, oh, we only work with native English teachers, then you don't want to stop and clear it out. Do you find that your colleagues are like that? Is everybody, or is the majority of people working in ELT like that? Do they feel like that? Or does it take a specific kind of personality?
I think maybe it takes a specific kind of personality, and I don't want to pigeonhole people, but I would probably expect the person saying that to be maybe somebody who is from a traditionally English-speaking environment. Because, as I mentioned, I come from South Africa, where we have, I think at this stage, 12 national languages. But the business language, and I would say probably the dominant language of study, is English. Yet, so many people in South Africa would not describe themselves as native English speakers because, we're not British. And then the question comes, what is a native English speaker? And that's probably a question that we're going to be discussing a little bit later.
Yeah, I think we do have to come back to that. But it's over to you, John, for now.
Yes, thank you, everybody. So my first sort of memory of the whole non-native, native speaker dichotomy was when I actually started doing the CELTA. And I mean, I'm not ashamed to say that I feel that I am sort of part of the problem, because I didn't know anything about meta-language, grammar. My language awareness was extremely low as a native speaker doing the CELTA in Italy. And there was this perception from the school where I did it that native speakers were the be-all and end-all, and that was their marketing ploy. That was their whole thing, was to promote themselves as a school that only had native speakers. So that was kind of scary, because all the non-native people who were working at that school, they did have, non-native speakers were kind of the best at language awareness. It was incredible. They knew everything about meta-language and grammar, teaching methodologies, and the native speakers were not as good as them at all. So that was an eye-opener for me, and it has always led me to now, as I am in management, to fly the flag for non-native speakers, because they're incredible teachers and they shouldn't be frowned upon, looked down upon, or any of those things.
How does what you've learned and what you believe in actually influence the recruitment process for Whitgift, for example, in the summer? If you think back to the teachers, and I'm going to ask the others as well this question. So you all very firmly believe in sort of equality. Let's call it equality for native and non-native teachers. But if you think back for the past 5 years or so in terms of recruitment, do you tend to have both native and non-native teachers? What's the reality, actually, John?
We have a mixture, yes. As a parenthesis here, it's become harder to employ non-native teachers because of Brexit. That's a big problem.
Probably for another episode of the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Season 2. But we do have excellent non-native teachers who have deltas and masters in linguistics and TESOL. So it doesn't have any sort of bearing for us in terms of if that CV comes through. Not at all. It's about what they've done in the classroom, what their trajectory has been as a teacher. That is the most important thing. And ultimately, when we interview how they come across, and we always ask them to talk about a lesson that they have recently taught. How does that look when they speak about it? That's important.
Right, thanks. Shoko, how about Celtic and your teachers?
Yeah, we're exactly the same situation as John. We have some excellent teachers. One of our senior teachers is from Italy, but also taught for many years in Hungary. So that particular recruitment, he actually moved over to the UK from Hungary. By being Cardiff, in Wales, where we have a less non-native speaking teachers, so it's harder for us to recruit. The percentage of native speakers or Welsh people much higher in Cardiff, but that's mainly due to geographical locations. Probably if we're based in London, we have a higher chance to have a higher proportions of non-native teachers or non-staff. But we look at quality of candidate and experience rather than where they're from or what their background. And we have an excellent portfolio of teachers regardless of native or non-native.
Yeah, I think it's important to state that obviously the goal is never, regardless of your geographic location, to have a certain percentage of natives and non-natives in your teaching staff. It's just a question of equal opportunities. Let's say.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we also hold the status called Fair Play Employer. This was awarded by the organisation called Coraiteg, which means fair play in Welsh. So we received gold standard a couple of years ago, and at the time we were only one of the 2 organisations who received that award. and then became the Fair Play Employee of the Year. So regardless of gender background, I think we have a very good HR practice to ensure that we provide equal opportunities to all employees and potential candidates.
Right, Marike, how's the situation with your summer camps delivered in Germany?
It's interesting what John said about Brexit. Pre-Brexit, it was very, very easy for us to recruit British teachers in Berlin. Germany seemed to be really popular as a destination for young British people to come and spread their wings for a little bit. But post-Brexit, that has been more difficult. We are quite intentional about our English recruitment practices in that we ensure that our recruitment team is already multicultural. And it's something that we're very intentional about the structure of that team for starters, because we think that makes it a lot easier for us to have open and clear and very granular conversations when we're making recruitment decisions, when we have to talk about people and their backgrounds and what we think about them and their potential, etc., etc. Then secondly, absolutely, as John said again, on paper, we can't hear an accent on paper. We can't see teaching passion on paper. So we do a very thorough theoretical screening on paper first to see if the person looks like a good teacher, what kind of experience do they have working with our age group of children, so depending on whether they're going into our courses or into our English camps, and then once we decide to interview, we make sure that we randomly allocate people from different nationalities to members of the recruitment team. So it's not a question of, for instance, letting me interview all the South Africans because the accent makes me feel all nice and fuzzy. So we're quite intentional in that. Of course, what is really important is when a line manager or when a client says, I need a native speaker, it's also important for me to understand that my client in courses is a different client to my client in the summer camp. So that my summer camp client, my age group of child there is probably in their teens, whereas in the courses department, the kids would be a lot younger. And therefore, there might be a higher tolerance for accent difference and probably even a measure of dialectic difference with an older child than there might be a tolerance for with a younger child who's only just learning the language. But in all of those cases, I would rather focus on the person's teaching experience and level of passion in their delivery than anything else.
I mean, you've mentioned two really interesting things that we'll try to go into. One is client requests, and the other is the question of accent and different Englishes, different native Englishes. So let's start with client requests. Do you all tend to get the request from clients that you want native teachers, or on the other hand, have you ever had to deal with complaints from clients about not having got a native teacher?
I can say yes on both of those questions, definitely. We get requests for it and we also get complaints. And it's very important then to go and investigate that complaint specifically to try and figure out what the complaint is about. What is the complaint based on? If the complaint is based on a perception, I obviously deal with it in a different way. But if the complaint says something along the lines of, we really struggled understanding this accent, then I have to take that on board as well.
John, how about your experience in this?
I have, in my sort of earlier days of managing the summer school, I used to get slightly defensive of my teachers, and so I would send quite a short, curt email to people saying all our teachers have to have X amount of experience and the minimum requirement is this, this and this. So but then I thought, actually, no, it should be, if we're going to change things, then we need to educate our friends, partners, parents, agents, families, everybody, to explain that although, yes, the teachers are not from the UK, but we never state that they would be. That's not a marketing. We don't say that, obviously, because we can't as well, for good reason. But please rest assured that, they've got the job on merit, and they are here because they should be here. And that, I just also say on a personal note, some of the best teachers I've ever worked with have been teachers who are not from the UK. So please rest assured, etc., etc. But as we've just mentioned, if there actually is an issue, then that needs to be looked into as well. Your own due diligence and quality assurance needs to be checked with your DOS and your ADOS as well. You can't just send off a reply. You do have to just check, even if you think that it's baseless.
Shoko, what's your experience in this?
Perceptional concerns we often receive before agents book or the students book the course with us, because of Wales, they somehow think that Welsh accent is very thick and very difficult to understand. So I reassure them that actually the accent or dialect in Cardiff is very mild. It's actually a very nice place to study. But also, I think by me living in Cardiff for over 20 years, I have a little bit of a Welsh twang. So I always say to them, if you understand my English, you will be absolutely fine. So more like a perceptional concerns that I receive, that I always reassure our partners, our students, parents, whoever I talk to, other than, and also emphasize that the UK is very long, big country. Depending on where you go, there are different dialects. Depending on client, let's say Saudi Arabia, I mentioned about different accents between Riyadh, Dammam, Jeddah, or if it's specifically Japan or Korea, I can actually hear different dialect anyway, and I can sort of almost explain that, part of this specific part of the UK's accent is equivalent of this part of Japan, but then we all understand each other. So that sort of reassurance and specific example help. But ultimately, we all speak the same language, and actually experiencing different language help them to improve English, because if once you're able to talk English, then you probably come across in an environment where you work with people from United States or Canada, Australia. We all have a very different dialect, and just helps if you're immersed yourself in a different accent. So luckily, I have never received complaints or concerns from any of clients saying that they don't understand our teachers' English. This is something I have never came across myself. But if we ever received, then of course I will just double check. But I guess what we encourage our students to do is, regardless of their age, even teenagers, if they find it hard in the classroom, we encourage them to talk to their teachers or come to just to talk to us. And often just a little tweak helps.
It's really interesting that the concerns that you've largely come across are more about the regional accent, which is understandable in the context of Wales. It obviously happens all over the world. So just because you go to a London school, you might as well get a Welsh or Scottish or Irish or, God forbid, German or Hungarian teacher. And then you've got the potential issue of understandability and worries around that. When it comes to worries around not being from the UK or getting back to not being a native speaker, I think one thing that clients often wonder about, at least, is that they are actually signing up themselves or their child for an immersive experience abroad. What would you say are realistic, reasonable, and good expectations about the immersive part of studying abroad? And what is it that we shouldn't encourage? Obviously, a lot of people come into this thinking, "Oh, I go to a language school in London, so I'll get RP as the context and the input," which is obviously very far from reality, regardless of the nationality of the teachers. But what do you think is the point of immersion, really? What should people expect from an immersive experience in the UK or any other country? John?
Well, I think it depends on the course and the age of the students. If I may, at Whitgift Summer School we have quite an interesting program in the sense that boys from Whitgift is a year-round boys' school, and we have a partnership with a girls' school in the local area. They come on the course from lunchtime to 9:30 in the evening, and a part of the CLIL/task-based/project work that we do in the afternoon. And they also do activities in the afternoon and the evening. So that is a really fantastic way for the international students to have, authentic inputs from their peers, which I would class as pretty immersive, which is really, really good. It's really, really great, and I think there needs to be an element of speaking English with the locals, or I don't know, some tasks that the students need to do if they're older students, interviewing people in central London or whatever. I think there needs to be something that's outside the classroom for it to feel real and not staged, quote unquote, in the classroom.
When it comes to the authentic context, if you get your students out in the streets in London in a safe and controlled manner, obviously, as you would, they will encounter different Englishes. And if they go into a cafe in central London, there's not necessarily going to be a lot of native speakers serving them. So in your context as well, even though you are from a private school where I assume the majority of the students and the majority of the students who take part as host students in the summer will be British, and correct me if I'm wrong, your authentic London context will mean exposure to lots of different Englishes. Is that right?
Yeah, they're all let's put it another way, mother tongue English speakers. Yeah, I also have a bit of an issue with the word native as well. I know it's used a lot in the context of EFL, and it has been for time immemorial, but there is a problem with that word native. I think it has negative connotations. So actually when we put blog posts up or in our marketing material, we don't use the word native speakers. When we talk about the British student hosts, we just call them British student ambassadors or mother tongue speakers. So yes, sorry, to answer your question, it is, yes, they're British mother tongue speakers, and the international students have loads of opportunities to actually speak with them in English, South London English, if you will, because that's where we're based. And I'd say it's a pretty unique opportunity for these international students because they're so used to just peer-to-peer in the classroom, and the other input they're getting is from their teacher. So this is a completely different context, which for them comes across as really authentic because it's their peers.
How do you see the authentic exposure, Shoko, in your context in Cardiff?
So during pandemic, it was realization for me that why our students pay £1,000 to come over to study English, because we obviously had to switch everything online. Some continued online lessons, but then there were a lot of online English language teaching competitors around the world, and suddenly we had to be on the same level playing field, and to somehow differentiate ourselves, I found really difficult. Then realized why students pay a lot of money coming over here is that immersive experience. Obviously by staying and living in the UK, but also being an English language centre where there's so many students from different backgrounds come together and study something for their shared goal. That's a very, very unique place. Because if you go to university, you don't probably share the same experience with so many different nationalities and staying with the host family, for example. Sorry, I should say homestay providers. So that itself is definitely immersive experience, but also just exploring city center, cafe, sightseeing, just all things. It's like whole package is the immersive experience. But when they come over here, they don't just come across so-called British culture. They experience different type of a cultural shock, meeting different people, and that's why what we do still exists. Nowadays we have AI, and you can study language online. Everything, there's so many different options available, but what we do is still popular, and often that's what our students choose is because of the immersive experience. But it's really difficult to list. There's so many things. That's how I feel.
Yeah, I think it's as you say, it's probably about shifting that sort of authentic context to mean what it actually is. It's not a British or a Welsh context. It's an international context that actually happens to be present in your environment, that is Cardiff or South London or Berlin, because someone can say, but I want to have authentic English environment, but that's not necessarily a thing. It probably never was, but it's definitely not a thing in a multicultural society. But you still have to travel to experience that, because if you stay where you are, you wouldn't be necessarily exposed to that kind of cultural mix. Marike, how does this look like in German summer camp, in a German English summer camp?
It's that's such an interesting question. I've been thinking about it and sort of obviously just comparing a little bit. For us, the first thing that we do is we make sure that our camp staff come from very different backgrounds. So we might have a handful of Australians or a handful of New Zealanders or a handful of Canadians working for us, but we try and mix them up on camp so that the kids can hear a variety of different English accents for many different reasons, but from a language point of view, because understanding different accents is part of learning to communicate well in English. And then we have this interesting situation where parents will complain that we either speak so much English in camp that their kid didn't understand a word all week, and other parents will complain that there was not enough English spoken. So it's very interesting to try and keep that balance. In our situation, the camp director has to be fully bilingual, so that they can relate to a child who's going through an emotional or physical crisis in German. But we encourage our staff to speak English 100% of the time. Obviously, it also helps if you have somebody from India and somebody from South Africa working together on camp. The only language that they have in common is English. So there's not this temptation to maybe when you're off duty, use a different language. And that way the kids also, the children get exposure to different accents, but also this coherent, fully English environment where they're just hearing English 12 or 14 or 16 hours a day, which we find really, really important.
It's quite fascinating how you manage to create this absolutely multinational environment in terms of your staffing in an artificial, but in a good sense, artificial way. Right. Well, you know where I stand in terms of being quite militant about fighting the corner of non-native English language teachers, which I myself am as well. Part of what gives me the confidence in doing so is that discrimination based on where someone was born is illegal, thankfully, at least in the UK, and I think in Germany as well, which gives us some ground. I know language itself is not a protected characteristic, but these decisions are typically made on your passport rather than your mother tongue, which puts us in a comfortable position if we want to be loud about this. But the reason why we have this podcast is that there are still some schools in the UK and, of course, many more around the world who still very loudly or quietly but firmly advertise their services by having native teachers only. Some of them do it because they fear that they'll lose business if they don't do that, if they don't comply with the kind of client requests that they are getting. And I understand that. As sort of the last question to you all, what kind of good practice, what kind of advice would you give schools who feel that they have to say yes to client requests that are about only having native teachers? What can give them confidence in turning these requests down and or educating their clients about it?
As I mentioned earlier, I think it's a question of educating and reassuring parents and agents and families that the world has changed a lot, particularly in the EFL sector, and it is completely normal, accepted and fine to have non-native speakers working in a school or institution, and that it has zero to little bearing on student outcomes. And yeah, I think the word is to reassure people, to not be scared and to normalize it. And if a family is inquiring at a good institution, then if that institution is then saying those positive things about non-native speakers, that will go some way, I think. Reassurance is the key.
Thank you. Shoko?
Like I said at the beginning, I haven't received those requests for probably more than 5 years now. Perhaps because I'm non-native speaker myself and the agent feel that they can't say such a thing to myself or my team. But also we've been quite open about our fair play employer practice. So I just simply haven't received those requests. But if I ever did, then I would be quite firm and direct. Of course, not telling them you can't do that or anything like that. But like John said, the outcome of our students, like taught either native or non-native speaker, there's no difference whatsoever. And I know that our teachers have a great experience and qualification. And often our students achieve more than what they're expected to do. So I've been very open and transparent, and I would make it very clear that we can't accept these requests.
Thank you. Marike?
I always try to find out what the objective for the question is. And often what we discover then is that what the person means is that they're using the term maybe native English speaker or mother tongue English speaker, but what they actually mean is that they want somebody with very clear enunciation. Or that they want somebody that to their ear is easy to understand. And then I point out to them that because we as humans have this that we're programmed to have strong preferences for what we're already familiar with and what we already understand, I tend to point out to them that the countries that seem to have the best English skills as second language speakers would be countries like the Netherlands and Denmark and Sweden. And those individuals or people from those countries tend to have a distinctive accent on their English, but it's not a difficult to understand accent. And generally, parents will then say, oh, well, yeah, they're quite happy with having a Dutch speaking, a native Dutch English speaker teaching their child English, because that person does not have a strong accent. And I repeatedly just reassure and say, remember, we're not talking here about an accent, we're talking about enunciation. And enunciation is something that we can teach. And as long as we focus on the ability to be passionate about teaching and the ability to speak in a manner that other people understand easily, then it's really easy to override in a sensitive way that request for a native English teacher.
Thank you. And thank you very much to you all for being here. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you so much for giving up your time. We'll now move on to an agent panel. So you'll very soon hear from 3 agents from 3 different countries, 3 parts of the world, after a very short commercial break. Okay, so by now you know the drill. No ads, just a little favour. Please hit follow or subscribe on the platform you're listening on now. It doesn't cost you anything, and you're not going to get to the end of this break quicker, even if you don't do it. Quite the opposite. I'll keep annoying you. I might even take the forest away, and then there's just going to be silence, like this. And that would be terrible. Quite pointless if you ask me for a podcast. So please follow or subscribe. It's easy. It's free. Thank you. And we're back with 3 wonderful agent friends from all over the world. I think I can say that. Afonso, Susan, Gabby, thank you so much for being here. Before we get into the topic of native and non-native speaker teachers, which I've been talking about with an expert in 3 schools just before you joined today, can we go around the room and can I ask you to introduce yourself briefly for those who happen to not know you? Tell us a little bit about what you do, your business, and also your clients, or where in the world your clients come from typically. Gabby, are you happy to start?
Hi, Andras. Hi, friends. Well, my agency is based in Argentina. We've been running for 34 years. And we work with students from Argentina, of course, but also with boundary countries such as Chile, Uruguay, Paraguay. And I'm also the president of the Argentine Study Abroad Association called ARSAA. And I am one of the board members in FELCA, the Federation of Association of Agencies. So doing some things every day.
Just a little bit of something here and there. Thank you. Susan, over to you.
Thank you, Andreas. It's lovely to be here. So, hello, everybody. I'm Susan Fang. I'm the founder of OxBridge Holdings. So, my agency deals with, helps international families, mainly from the Far East, to come to English-speaking countries. So, UK is one of our biggest destination countries. We also do US, and now increasingly so other parts of Asia, because our clienteles are changing their appetite. So we go where our clients want to go. And I've been doing this for coming up to 25 years now. So I love the international education business and made lots and lots of friends.
Afonso, over to you.
So I own an agency in Portugal called EduForward. We've been in business for 7-8 years, but I've been in the sector for more than 25 years, because from when I was 6 until I was 16, I was a student at summer camps in the UK, every year to a different place. And then I also worked in the UK for 3 years after that as director for a couple of summer schools. So it's really nice to have this sort of feedback from, and actually having lived the front office of it, and also having experienced the back office of it in order to be able to help our clients. Most of them are Portuguese, but some of them are from a couple of Portuguese-speaking countries in Africa, some from Spain as well, mostly from neighboring cities to Portugal, some Brazilians as well. So it's a passion, and luckily it's a passion that I've managed to gather some experience around as well.
Now I feel I'd rather have a conversation with you all about your life and careers, but unfortunately we won't have time for that today, although we might come back to that in a later episode. So we're here today to continue a conversation about native and non-native English language teachers in the context of studying abroad in the UK or another English language speaking country. You all work with language schools, summer schools, and other schools and universities in English language speaking countries, and you've got lots of different kind of clients looking for different outcomes from each kind of programs. How do you see the demand for native teachers? Is it something that comes up in requests from clients? Is this something that you advertise? Is this something that you look for in terms of what schools offer? Tell me everything, or just tell me any kind of defining memory that you have in this field. Gabby, are you happy to start?
Yes, I'm happy to start. Well, to be honest, we certainly don't advertise native teachers within our partner schools. We don't think that is appropriate because it's very difficult today to identify what a native speaker of a certain country is. Yes, there was a concern about this, like in the early 90s when I started in the business. Students and their families, when they were underage, used to ask, okay, you're taking them to the US, to the UK, but will they have native teachers of English? And in those days, there was not the issue that we have right now. Yeah, but I don't know what my colleagues feel here, but today there is a sort of revival of this concern, and sometimes they tend to ask, whether, I don't know, if the course is in the UK, teachers will be native speakers from the UK, and sometimes they don't even say the UK, but England. So it's pretty difficult to make them understand that the UK is a melting pot of all nationalities, and that you have UK people who were born in the UK, whose parents were born in the UK, but they came from a different place because of colonialization and because so many different historical events that have changed the whole world. It is a concern. It's becoming a bit difficult to deal with these days.
You sort of have already said what your typical answer is likely to be to a concern, a question like that. Do you feel that you sometimes lose clients over this? How do people react to what you've just said?
Sometimes they don't understand to start with, but then after the conversation, they come to the conclusion that what I say is nothing but the truth. There is no more segregation in this world, and people live wherever they can. Yes. I also tend to make them understand that it is good for their kids. When we're talking about parents, talking to parents, it is good for them to get used to different accents. You try to show them the positive sides to it, which in fact for me everything is positive. There is no negative side to it. But what they say is because, you have to consider that we are in Latin America, that in order to go to the UK, we have to fly for 14 hours, that schools, high schools and private schools here in Argentina have a really strong British tradition regarding language. Yes, they tend to study British English more than American English. So they see all this cultural load in books, in textbooks, and the British monarchy and British traditions. And so when they travel to the UK, they want to see that. They want to be connected to that, not to other cultures. They want to see other cultures, but in the classroom, they want everything to be British, to be related to UK language, traditions, society. So it's difficult, yes.
Yeah, I completely understand. Susan, how about you and your clients?
I think this is a great question, Andreas. I can think of an example of a child who came for a boarding school. Now, this child, originally from China, had been reading Harry Potter's ever since the book one came out. So we're talking about quite a few years back now. And she was very determined to find a school that has the Harry Potter look and all the teachers, the Dumbledore, the Slytherin and all the different houses. So when she arrived at that school, she was slightly disappointed because obviously there's no such thing as a Harry Potter school, and the teachers don't speak the way they speak in the film. They don't dress the way they dress. So it's quite disheartening for a child, 14-year-old to like have their dream bubble burst. So I think it's all about managing expectation. So we as an agent or a consultant, before we make any recommendation to a family, to a child, we say, this is your dream. You want to go to a place where Harry Potter was born. You want to go to a place where the Bronte sisters wrote their book, but that after all is fiction. And whatever is depicted in those stories are fictionalized. And we live in the 21st century. You will not go to your current school. I mean, that girl came from an international school in China. You go and look at your international school. Are they full of internationals? Or are they full of people from different background, expats, and predominantly maybe a lot of Chinese, but all speak very good English, right? So this is just an ecocosm, a microcosm, what it was going to be like on the greater world. So I answered her question, I answered her concern with another question. Put yourself in the shoe of a British child coming to China. If they want to go to a native speaking Chinese schools, how would you feel? Because possibly there are other teachers who can speak very well Chinese, but they were not born in China. Do you not want those teachers to also have an equal chance to impart their wisdom on the Chinese culture and the language to that British child coming to your country, our country? Yes. So this is when you try to reverse the situation, and somewhat the child as well as their parents will be a lot more understanding and empathetic with where we're trying to explain. And I hope I've answered your question.
You most definitely have. Thank you. Let's see what Afonso has to say. Over to you.
I believe compared to some other Latin countries, Portugal is quite specific in a way that our English level, or at least our kids' English level, is usually better than other Latin countries because, first of all, because we don't dub films, so obviously that there's a big gap there. I remember going to Spain as a kid, and whenever we used to go into Corte Inglés, the big department store, and they would speak the brand names on the microphone, I would always be puzzled at how the way they would pronounce the brands would be the same. Or them saying Maria Carey rather than Mariah Carey. Well, in Portugal, we would always know, the actual pronunciation. And so kids here, usually they either have English from a very young age, or if they don't have it at normal school, they go into a language school and they have English as a side activity. So I think for most parents, this is a very normal question to ask, which is when comparing between agents, especially, are you able to ensure that the kids' teachers will be native speakers? And the way I approach this is obviously there's a sale to be made, and we can take the easy route, which is to say, absolutely yes, obviously. And from the procurement side, we would do what we can in order to ensure that happens. And then if the suppliers fall through or not, that's a whole other story. But I think from our perspective, and I think this aligns with the counseling and the level of guidance and expertise that both Gabi and Susan have, we tend not to choose the easy route because we just feel like it's a disservice to people. I just try and explain the advantages of really working with people that more often than not will not be native teachers. So obviously, and even though parents are a bit reluctant, I usually say, look, I feel it's much better to actually learn from someone that knows the struggle, that has come from, point 0, as your kids have, to point 100 or to 90. And for that person to understand the struggle, and also for kids to see that person as a role model of what that person was able to accomplish from coming from Italy, from coming from China, from coming from any other country, and now speaking English to a level that they're allowed to teach non-native students how to teach English. I also feel that most of these teachers, I mean, I can't speak for all, but most of the non-native teachers we've encountered on the programs we sell, they have a better degree of empathy towards our students. especially when there's like a disturbance in the classroom, because obviously they can relate to kids being unsettled at a summer camp, for example, on the first few days. I also feel that because we're selling, and as Susan said, this is in every person's imagination, the Hogwarts, the boarding school. We are setting them up for disappointment, as Susan shared, if we allow for them to think that this is the experience they'll have at the other side. I usually tell parents most of the English that these kids are learning in order to serve them at a future stage of life. They will most likely be speaking English with people not from Commonwealth countries, which means that it's much better if they're able to understand foreigners speaking English and actually relate not just to cultural things from Britain, but to know things about Egypt, to know things about Japan, to know things about Italy, because that is the majority of their audience in the future, and not British people.
Right, thank you. I mean, lots of very important aspects brought in by all of you. I understand it, and let me put myself in the shoe of your client who came in with the request of a strictly native English Harry Potter style environment and all that. You've explained that that's not quite the case. Teachers will come from all over the world, but it's still going to be a great melting pot kind of experience. Isn't it the logical conclusion at that step for them to say, right, so I understand the reality now, but I don't actually think anymore that my child needs to travel 2.5 hours to England, because it's just going to be the kind of multicultural environment that they can get much closer to home and for much cheaper, maybe in an international school in Shanghai or Taipei, or in Buenos Aires or in Lisbon. So do you ever get that sort of stage when people question the value of the whole experience? Suzanne, nodding?
So for sure, I mean, okay, probably not so much with the short-term English language course, because the whole point of learning English language is to immerse yourself in a different country. And it's not just what you learn in the classroom, it's what you pick up from outside. You go order a Big Mac from McDonald's, you go and get a coffee from Cafe Nero, that sort of thing. But it doesn't definitely happen in a boarding school context, because there's so many British branded or internationally branded boarding schools are popping up in Asia. And it is cheaper to send your kids out there, and it's closer to home. So should there, God forbid, another pandemic, they can shoot home straight away than traveling all these miles from UK and USA. But I always ask the parents, what is your ultimate goal? If you're just wanting your child to get a high school diploma at the end, get your A-levels, get your IB, then by all means, stay in China. Your child's probably going to get a better grade by staying in China because it's so competitive. However, if you want your child to have this experience, a really global vision, and to be able to have that confidence to travel afar, leave home, and be independent, organize your time, and manage, tie up your shoelaces, and manage your day without your parents hovering over you, then probably going abroad and leaving home is a great idea. So it is all down to the parents. What do they want from their child?
Gabby?
Just my 2 pence of salt.
Yeah, I agree with Susan, 100%. And I always tend to explain to my clients that the core of the, well, Susan was talking about high school programs, yes, but if we talk about short-term summer programs, we tend to promote our programs as fully immersive, and that goes far beyond the classroom. Particularly my groups are all led by, English speaking people, teachers of English. And so no matter what happens inside the classroom, after the lesson comes to an end, we go on teaching them in the streets, in the shops, in the museums, art galleries. We are learning all the time, and we are using English language as a tool. It is the means to an end, which is greater than the language course itself. So that is unbeatable. That is something that you cannot get if you stay home and you go to the best English language academy, because there is much more to the course itself. So I don't think that in the end it is a problem. I mean, the question of having or not having native speakers as teachers of English.
We've mostly been speaking about children and decision makers being their parents. Is it any different when it comes to adults?
Not
and I'm
at all.
particularly asking it. What I really meant there is you can add that sort of extra layer of education by forcefully making children speak English to each other and go to museums and learn words in the context of just going to McDonald's or a cafe. It's slightly different with adults, isn't it? But you're saying, Gabby, it doesn't change it at all.
Yeah, it's the same thing, because they are immersed in a new place with people that will definitely speak either English or a language different from their own. So they will be there and they will be, I mean, incorporating all this indirect knowledge that they cannot get in the place where they live, be it Argentina or Portugal or China.
Afonso?
So we mostly sell to children teams, and we've now mostly after COVID, I feel we tried to do it before, but I feel the market wasn't ready yet for those sort of words. But we now market actively these experiences that promote skills, and they're not an experience for kids to learn English or to improve English. The English bit is a byproduct of the experience they will go through. And I always tell, having been through the experience myself, I always tell parents 2 or 3 things about my experiences as students. Because, the first 2 or 3 years I had to phone home through a phone box, because obviously it was the 2001. I mean, my parents had a cell phone, but obviously I didn't, and I was 6. So I would bring coins, and my tears will outdo my coins most times. I'd still be crying on the phone, and the call will be disconnected. But I remember that, going through, for example, the Japanese, whenever we were in this sort of context over the summer, they would always do these little things to gift us at the end of our stay. Chinese as well, and Taiwanese too. So they would gift us maybe a postcard or a dream catcher or something of sorts. And I remember there was this time where a kid that I befriended throughout the program, but the first program I went was a football only program. That's how my parents enticed me to go. So he offered that to me. He had made it with their group leader and stuff. And I remember, accepting it, thanking it, and then coming back home. And my dad asked, how did he gift it to you? And I was like, well, he bowed a bit and then used both hands. And then my dad was like, how did you take it? And I, well, how you take just, first there's one hand. And I said, thank you very much. It's like, I completely forgot, because I went to Japan when I was really young. So people do things differently. You need to bow a bit. You need to use both hands. The same thing when you hand a business card over and stuff. So, and then I remember on the second life I had while I was working for another company selling uniforms to airlines. I was in Germany at an event, and I met the CEO of Japan Airlines, and I instantly kicked in when he was sharing his business card. And I was like, and this came from me being 6 and going through that experience.
I think if I was one of your prospective parents, for either of you, I'd be convinced now. So thank you. There's one other aspect I'd like to ask your opinion on quickly, and that's in-country delivery, as in language teaching in your source markets. If you think of language schools where your clients come from, what are their practices as far as you can see? Do they still value native teachers higher than local teachers? Is there a different attitude towards them? I think the UK obviously has changed a lot, and it's very difficult and actually shockingly surprising to find schools that still advertise with native teachers, but it's quite different all over the world. So what's the situation in your home countries?
Well, things have changed after the pandemic because people stopped traveling a bit. But just before the pandemic, many language schools here in Argentina, and mostly in Buenos Aires, because this is where all tourists come, yes, used to advertise native teachers of English. So sometimes you get international students that come to Buenos Aires to study at university for a semester, and sometimes in their free time, they used to get jobs in language schools. But the problem is that their English level was perfect. Of course, they were native people, but they didn't have the skills to teach English. So, in a way, it was a negative. There was a negative side to it. So, fortunately, things now have changed, and teachers of English should not be native, but should have the proper skills in order to teach English as a foreign language. So that tendency has fortunately stopped.
It's very nice to hear. I mean, there's a lot of value judgment in what I'm saying, but there's a lot of value judgment in my motivation for this podcast anyway, so I'll say it. Susan?
I think I will share a very similar experience with Gabby. COVID was definitely a huge pivot point. Before that, many expats, UK, US, Australians, expats are traveling to China, and most of the time probably they're there for holiday. So it's very easy for them to just pick up a holiday job or a part-time job as a teacher, and not just in the language school, but also in proper international schools. But things have changed since COVID. I think we all know China went through a very strict quarantine period. So lots of the said expat teachers have come out, and now it's becoming increasingly difficult to go back. So I think even if the schools want to advertise, they want to continue this this notion that yes, we have native speakers, we just can't simply get the teachers, so they need to adapt. Again, I fully agree with what Gabby has said. Those who are native speakers, or those who come from a good pedigree schools of universities or schools, that doesn't make them a good teacher. Good teachers have to go through the experience. Having had experience, you probably have to teach for 10,000 hours before you can really hands on heart say, yeah, I'm a good teacher. I've seen all kinds of students. I've helped manage their correct their accents, pronunciation, the way they write, and how they're motivated. You've got to go through those hours before you can really say, yes, bona fide, good teacher. Those who just speak it, am I native? I'm not native. This is my second time, but I would not be able to say I can teach English because I've not gone through the training, nor have I gone through that 10,000 hours of teaching. So this is something that if you, as an education consultant agent, we sit the parents down, sit the family down, whether they're for an adult learner or for a child learner, you talk sense to your prospective client and say, would you put yourself in front of someone who just looks like they can do the thing, but have never had the track record to back it up? Would you pot your money and be their student, be their apprentice? I think 9 out of 10, they'll say no. So, yeah.
Afonso and
Yeah,
Portugal?
exactly the same. I put my faith in a maths teacher because that teacher has gone through the process of learning maths and learning how to teach and then teaching maths. So when we speak about people teaching English, they need to know two things: how to teach and how to speak English. So I think if we were to approach, English teaching as we approach a maths teacher, a science teacher, whatever, and the expertise that we request for these people to be at a university or at a school teaching these subjects to our kids, then we would be less inclined to have this sort of judgment about, teachers being native or not. Obviously, as I mentioned, we sell the experience, we sell the autonomy, we sell, there are many parents that say, oh, he's 14, he's not ready. And obviously the bottom line is you're not ready because they weren't ready for first grade, but because we all came up with this concept of going through first grade at that age, you don't question it. So I feel that we do fight that stigma. I think after COVID, it improved, but improved, as Susan said, because out of necessity, not out of, we didn't just come to the realization that, it just had to be this way, just out of necessity. Hopefully, we will still struggle, so we can keep looking at this as being the new normal. Let's put it this way.
Right. I'm going to ask you for some very brief final thoughts, as in advice. And advice to any agents and any schools out there who still feel that in order to meet demand, they have to say yes to requests for native teachers, and as schools employ only native teachers, and as agents advertise schools that would say native teachers only, whether that's true or not. So what advice can you give to fellow agents and schools in order to have the confidence that it's not going to hurt their business but make them stronger if they decline while educating their clients these requests? Gabby?
Yeah. Well, this is a difficult one because I think it depends on how you see yourself as an agency. I mean, if you're well established, if you are not trying to catch clients no matter what, it is a bit more difficult to deal with these sort of situations. Yes, I am. After 34 years, I am in a position to choose my students, to choose who are the right students for the sort of programs I promote. As Afonso said before, we have a passion for what we do. We do what we do with love, and we're looking for outcomes that will change the students' outlook on life. No matter whether they are young, middle-aged, old. I mean, we want a student to come back to their home country feeling different. And I believe in the concept of glocalization more than globalization, yeah? Because you travel abroad, you are exposed to hundreds of things you didn't know before, and you come back home in a different way, and you bring back certain elements that you can add to your everyday life in order to make your community better. So there are certain things, of course, that you will see abroad you won't like, but there are others that will make your society improve. So the nature of the teacher of English is not important at all as long as they know how to teach. Because in the end, what we are looking for in a teacher is just this ability to transmit language appropriately, but loaded with culture and things that will transform somebody's life. That's the idea. And as we all agreed here, what we promote is not a language course. It's a transformative experience that will turn somebody into a different person.
Susan?
I don't think I can top Gabby. Yeah, it makes
It's not
me
a
want to go on
competition.
then. Language course. Similarly to Gabby, I think OxBridge, my company, and myself, we are in a very fortunate position where we can actually say no. So these days, I choose the battle I want to fight. If the clientele wants to work with me and they have the patience to listen to my transformative pitch, then yes, of course, I will fight tooth and nail and tell the parents and tell the child or tell the adult clientele why I think it's important to go with certain teachers, irrespective of their background, whether they are native tongue, because they will bring this transformative experience to the clientele. However, if any moment I suss out this clientele is not of that category, then I'll welcome them. I will clap my hands and bid farewell and guide them to my next door competitor. Yeah, just choose the battle you want to fight. I know not all agencies can do that, but we should always aspire to a point where one day we can do that. And, it makes sense. If all of us stand on the same line, then these clients will have to learn to respect what we believe in. But if one of us fall down or compromise, then it's challenging, isn't it? So we all have to stand in the same line.
Afonso, final thoughts?
It's almost like asking if you should bother recycling or not. But it's I feel it's exactly the same. Like you need to be the change you want to see in the world. So obviously, it's something we're so passionate about this that I feel it would be a disservice, a very big disservice, not just to the industry but to ourselves, really, to say otherwise. To say, look, really understand what you mean. So yeah, we will look for a supplier. We will look for an experience that has just the kind of teachers you have. In most cases, clients don't really know what they want. So I would also struggle to see value in taking on board all the thoughts and hopes that every client has. It's hard to stay in our lane, especially because I feel Susan mentioned that if we hold the line, I feel in my geography, I feel that like the only infantry soldier sometimes holding this line. But I feel that I need to push for long-term success rather than to push for instant gratification, because people come and go, students come and go. I may lose this one, I may lose that family, I may lose a whole community, but I won't compromise on our values, our beliefs, and what we believe that there are key factors for kids to experience a life-changing experience.
Well, Gabi, Susan, Afonso, thank you so much. This conversation has given me a lot more than I hoped for, actually, emotionally and in all aspects of what we do, really. So thank you so much for your time and for all your thoughts and views shared here. And thank you once again to our expert and our school panelists as well. 7 people in one podcast. That was quite the undertaking. I might not do this again, but I'll definitely see you next month for another episode. So thank you very much for bearing with us. Remember to subscribe or follow. Thank you. Bye-bye.